So, I'm going to tell you a couple of stories today, but the stories are going to start with my story. I am one of a disappearing breed called the native Charlestonian. So, my dad's family are descendants from enslaved Africans at McLeod Plantation. My mother's family is from the St. Thomas and St. Denis Parish in Wando. Now, Ellen said that I have to have the gratuitous kid shot. Here you go. I have been a storyteller all my life, and it started when that man, Dr. Harrell, my pediatrician, called me the mouth of the South. I have been trying to live into that ever since. So, grew up in Charleston, went to Clemson for college, somehow managed to get a degree in biology with a minor in communications, but that's another story, and moved to Washington, D.C., where I became a TV producer. So I got to be a professional storyteller. I got to talk about people, places, culture, and events. Yes, that is me in front of Air Force One. That is me with Jimmy Fallon. But 10 years ago, I decided to move home because I wanted to not cover a story, but I wanted to be part of the story of Charleston. And 7 years ago, this week, I started with the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation. One of the things that we do at the foundation is we help organizations tell the story of the Lowcountry. So I want to tell you a couple of stories tonight about the place that you live that you probably don't know. And we're going to start with this piece of wood in this water. Anybody know what that is? That is a 4,000-year-old piece of a dugout canoe that was found at the bottom of the Cooper River back in the 90s. The Warren Lash Center has it right now. Did you know there were 24+ Native American tribes here in the Lowcountry at some point? Most of them eradicated either through disease or enslavement, and they were sent to the Caribbean because if they stayed here, they would have run away. What you also may not know is that a lot of those tribes still have a presence here in South Carolina today. When we were at Warren Lash Center looking at this Native American dugout canoe, representatives from the 5 local state and federal recognized tribes were there, talking about how to preserve the history of the Native Americans in the region. So the foundation last year funded a project with the Native American Studies Center at USC Lancaster to collect the oral histories for the Native American populations here in the Lowcountry, the 5 recognized and the 4 not recognized tribes. So next I want to tell you another story, a little closer to my home over on James Island. It'll change in a second. I want to see who knows where this place is. Anybody? What is it? It's the Seashore Farmers Lodge on Soligree on James Island. So the Seashore Farmers Lodge is the site of a number of things on James Island, one being there was a historic battle during the Civil War, the Battle of Battery Wagner. It's also the place where the Massachusetts 54th was housed. But the Seashore Farmers Lodge is one of 37 mutual aid lodges in the African American settlement communities here in the Lowcountry. They provided life insurance, they provided health insurance, they provided financial assistance, they've provided meeting spaces for the people that lived in their communities. And since 1915, that community has been protecting and preserving their story. So one of the things that the foundation worked on last year was supporting a joint project between the community members on Soligree and the Clemson Historic Preservation Program to protect the stories, but to also train the community members on how to do collections management. They have a Civil War sword in this museum at the Seashore Lodge. They've got castanets that were woven by hand by the people who live in that community. And now they have an opportunity to teach other community members how to protect their history as well as do care for the items that are in their lodge. So who knows where this building is? This is 62 Broad Street, but this story is not about the building, but somebody who actually lived there, Ned Jennings. Ned Jennings was an artist back in the Charleston Renaissance, back in the 20s. He was also an assistant curator at the Charleston Museum. Now, who here has lived here long enough to remember when the Charleston Museum was at the corner of Calhoun and Rutledge? Anybody? A couple of folks. So Ned was a curator, he was an abstract artist, he was also gay, and he killed himself at the age of 31 after a failed love affair, because at that time, homosexuality was a criminal act. So the Gibbs Museum is planning to actually reinterpret his work and the work of other gay artists and writers through the new lens of the LGBTQ movement, and really take into consideration that at the time when Ned Jennings and his contemporaries were alive, there wasn't even a language or a word to express who they were and what they were doing. And this last slide is the Avery Research Center. You may know that the Avery Research Center was the Avery Normal School for African American students from 1865 to 1954. But we had a really interesting conversation with Dr. Tamara Butler and her team last year about looking at the civil rights movement, and not looking at it from way back, starting in the 50s, but actually starting with today, with the Black Lives Matter movement. And how do you actually look at the arc of civil rights? Because Black Lives Matter movement didn't come from just anywhere. It actually is deeply rooted in a long history of civil rights across the Low Country, from the Reconstruction period of self-determination to the 1950s and the 1960s, all the way through today. And so they are now working on collecting oral histories of those members of the community who are still here, who can talk about the various challenges and the changes of civil rights in the Low Country from then until now. So I hope that in the last 6 minutes that you learned a little something today, and I have 2 requests. There are a lot more stories about the Low Country that we don't know, and the Foundation's looking for them. And I'm looking for the organizations that want to tell them. So if you know of them, let me know. And the second thing that I'll ask of you is, there's a lot to learn. Keep an open mind. This is my other gratuitous shot for the day, and who knew you'd see camo and ducks twice tonight? Never did I think I would be wearing camo and going duck hunting in the cold in January, but I did it. And you know why? Because it was a new experience and it taught me something about the culture of the Low Country that I didn't know. Thank you.